Hello and welcome to the video on sample surveys. This is the first video where I'm just going to be talking about some important terms that you should be familiar with, okay, when we're talking about these sample surveys. So let's start off with a population. So we have this population, and the population is everybody we're interested in. Okay, so this is the population of interest. Population of interest. Okay, and what we do with these sample surveys, and I'm sure you heard of them, sometimes they'll call them a poll, and most people haven't been polled, but believe me, they're really good at picking these people to represent this population. So what happens is they reach into here, okay, and they pull out a sample. Okay, and when they ask them whatever questions, that's the sample survey. So really what the sample is, it's a portion of the population of interest. Okay, and most people kind of get that when you're talking about these sample surveys. Okay, and another word that we hear a lot is bias. Okay, so bias is when we over or underemphasize. It's when we over or underemphasize characteristics, certain characteristics of our population. Because it's not the sample that we're really interested in. We're going to use the sample to say something about the population. Well, if we only pick certain people from our population, okay, and it's not a good representation of that population, then we're going to have bias. We're going to uh, consistently over or underestimate or emphasize certain characteristics. Like you could be right once, but if you take another sample, another sample, and another sample, if you don't sample correctly, you will have bias. Okay? And then how do we get around that? The big way that all of these sample surveys or all these samples are chosen with the sampling methods is we randomize. The next video is going to be on all the proper ways that we randomize. Okay? This video is just about some key terms, some key ideas. They're very important. I don't know why I use that when I have this nice straight line ability. Just to do that. Okay. Alright, so next let's talk about what do you think is more important when we're doing these? Getting these. Do you think it's the size of the population or the size of the sample? Okay, well, take a guess. Size of the population or size of the sample? Which one do you think is more important? And if you said size of the sample, you are correct. Okay, it's not the size of the population. A lot of people think that you have to take a certain percentage of the population. So for example, if there's 1,000,000 people in your population, people think that you actually have to take more, okay, than if you had 1,000 in your population. But the reality is if your population, okay, so let's say we had 1,000,000. Okay, we had 1,000,000 in our population, and then say in this one we only had 10,000 in our population. Okay? And let's say that we randomly picked and our sampling methods was fine. And we chose, and say we chose 100 people, 100 in our sample. We evaluated these 100 people. We chose 100 people in here. Okay? Based on what I said about what's more important, um, in this case, there's no bearing on this. This is the same. These results, they're the same. It doesn't necessarily make a difference that this is a million and this is 10,000. Okay? The sample size of 100 will be fine for just both. Okay? We could use those data. Okay? So don't think that you have to take more just because you have more people in your population. Okay? That's just not true. Okay, next we're going to the census. The census. Okay? So a census is when we contact everybody. We contact um, all in population. So a lot of people think, well, just this sounds good. Why don't we just do this all the time? Well, one reason is money. Okay, it's just not plausible to contact a million people or even 10,000 people when I could take 100 and, relatively get pretty close with my parameters as long as I sample correctly. Another reason is you might have a product line with a bunch of Twinkies. You might have a 1,000 Twinkies and you need to test that lot. You might need to taste some of them. So if you were going to take a census, you'd actually eat them all. You'd eat. So does it make sense to take a take a census and eat all your food? No. Okay. And there's some other problems too with census, being that they're just the census is changing. People are coming into this world and leaving this world every day. Um, so it's just not a good way to do it all the time. Okay. And the last thing is very, very important, which is the population and parameters and how we call things, how we name these things. Okay, so characteristics about the population, we call them parameters or population parameters. Okay, so things that we might be interested in a population. Okay, so let's say this is my population. Okay, things we might be interested in are the mean. That would be a parameter. That's a that's a characteristic we're interested in. Another thing is the standard deviation, which is denoted as this. Okay, another thing we might be interested in, the proportion of people. Okay, the proportion. Okay, for example, this would be like a vote. Okay, if you're going to win an election or not, the proportion of people that are going to vote for me, we call that P. So that's three parameters that we're interested in. These are all called population parameters. Start getting used to that. Population parameters. Okay? Now when I reach in there and I take the sample, okay? So this is my sample. We call them sample statistics or just statistics. Okay? Statistics. Okay? And some statistics are X bar, which is the mean. S of X, which is the standard deviation. Another one we haven't dealt with is called P hat, which is the proportion. All of these guys down here are statistics. All of these guys here are called parameters. So whenever you hear parameter, you know they're talking about the population. Whenever you hear statistic, you know they're talking about data from the sample. Okay, it's very important that you get that concept now, because from now on, the book could be talking and they're talking about parameters, so you automatically have to just go to the population. They're talking about the population. Okay, or they're talking about statistics. Automatically, they're talking about the sample. Okay, and there are a few more that we're going to be doing later on down the year that that, I guess I could write one down, but one would be, another parameter would be the slope, which is a big B, and a little b, or we'll call it B1, which is the slope from the sample. Okay, so that's it for here. These are just a few terms that you should be comfortable with in this video, and we'll be talking about sampling methods next. Thanks for watching.